your taxes and slave owners, not just distant history. On Tuesday 16th of June 2020, the Prime Minister of Britain Boris Johnson stood up in the House of Commons and declared among other great triumphs, that Britain had ended the slave trade, North Atlantic. What the Prime Minister failed to point out to the British public is that Britain started this odious trade in the first place, by being pivotal in the creation of the North Atlantic slave trade in 1660, and further by maintaining that abhorrent crime against humanity with its guns, ships and law, for nearly 200 years and at the cost of millions of enslaved African lives. BAME News decided to do some research under Freedom of Information Act 2000. We focused on the Slavery Abolition Act 1833 and the subsequent Reparation Act, Slavery Abolition Act 1835. We considered two questions. 1. Is it true in 1833 Britain used 40% of its budget to buy freedom for slaves in the Empire? 2. Can you confirm that the borrowed money for Abolition Act was only paid off in 2014? What follows is an answer from Her Majesty's Government. HM Treasury Summary. I can confirm that HM Treasury does hold information within the scope of your request. The government used £20 million, £16.5 billion today, to fund the Slavery Abolition Act 1833. In 1833 this was equivalent to approximately 40% of the government's total annual expenditure. 40% annual expenditure in 1833 represents approximately £300 billion in today's economy 2020. The Slavery Abolition Act, 1835 loan was rolled over into the government's gilt program, ultimately into an undated gilt, the 4% consolidated loan. The 4% consolidated loan was redeemed on the 1st of February 2015. Information on the compensation payable under the Slavery Abolition Act 1833 can be found here. Follow the money. By now the good in you will have reasoned that freedom and compensation paid to the enslaved and their families for the centuries of brutality, torture and the murderous treatment they endured is a positive action, the right thing to do, humane, just, righteous freedom and financial compensation for their suffering. You'd be wrong. According to the British government, and in fairness, every government before them, the enslaved were not due reparations. So how was the money apportioned? Abolition of Slavery Act 1833. Total compensation payment, enslaved equals 0. For property loss, 47,000 registered slave owners equals £20 million sterling. £16.5 billion sterling, today. Yes. You read that correctly. Africans 0% of financial compensation, slavers 100%. Are you starting to see a pattern here? So now at least we are getting somewhere. We are told by the government, from official records, that Britain spent 40%, yes believe it or not 40% of its annual budget in 1833 to buy back the freedom of the very people it had enslaved for nearly 200 years. No compensation was paid to the enslaved, but eye-watering amounts of compensation were paid to their former slave owners, and this would be funded through the British taxpayer, that's you and me, for an indeterminate period of time. And we have subsequently discovered that the period of British taxpayer bailout of the slave trade would not expire until 2015, which was when the final payment would be made. Let's put all this into perspective. What does it actually mean to you, me and the average girl or guy in the street? Simple. There is perhaps a sickening irony in the fact that whether someone is a neo-Nazi surfing the net or a BAME medic working in an IC unit, tax is tax. And a tiny but numerically significant fraction of all the taxes you have ever paid into the British government's treasury, up until the 1st of February 2015, would have gone towards the compensation of slave traders and their ancestors for their former property slaves, and not just your taxes of course. It would be your father's taxes, your mother's, your brother's, your sister's, grandparents', even your great-great-grandparents' taxes. In fact, every British tax-paying subject all the way back to 1833 would have been furnishing the pockets of the architects of mass slavery. Varnishing the facts. By now you might be wondering, why I haven't heard about all this stuff before. They told me back in school that this white abolitionist guy called William Wilberforce freed all the slaves because he was a God-fearing man and these poor black slaves needed help. Job done. Rule Britannia. Not quite, I'm afraid. A dirty secret, let slip. The very fact that you, and your parents, and their parents in turn, may have been paying for a huge slave owner compensation package from the 1830s, only came to the public attention through a revealing tweet which was sent to the Guardian newspaper on the 9th of February 2015 by HM Treasury, where a loose-lipped clerk let slip. Treasury tweet. Here's today's surprising Friday fact. Millions of you have helped end the slave trade through your taxes. The amount of money borrowed for the Slavery Abolition Act was so large that it wasn't paid off until 2015, which means that living British citizens helped pay to end the slave trade. Guardian newspaper, the 29th of March 2018. Crease Manjapura. The tweet, which was hastily deleted, had the stench of British historical amnesia and of institutionalized racism. Not a single shilling of reparation, nor a single word of apology has ever been granted by the British state to the people it enslaved, or their descendants. BAME comment. Throughout the COVID-19 epidemic we have been bombarded by news soundbites of the British government, in the guise of their Treasury Ministry, declaring how much the country is spending on the current crisis, unprecedented spending. They regularly remind us that it's worse than the banking crisis, as though the poor need reminding of this, and how not since the Second World War and even before then with the Depression era, never has the country and its people been so financially overburdened. Yet nobody mentions the 1835 Reparations Act abolishing slavery, which cost the country a record 40% deficit budget and debt that continued to be paid off up until 2015, at the rate of 4%, and while the minuscule nature of the compound interest on the loan is not the point here, it is the disgusting fact that we have been paying former slave owners and their families through our taxes for 183 years and nobody has had the guts to tell us. And that is a bloody national disgrace. In the next edition of BAME and Shame News we continue to follow the slave trade bailout and discover where our money went. We will reveal the names of some of the slave owners and those families that benefited and continue to benefit from the heritage of slavery. Thank you for your time.